Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. I would like to welcome Dr. Michael Stokes. He and his husband have now adopted 2 children through our agency, and we're looking forward to learning more about each of your placements, some of the challenges you may have experienced, what it was like to adopt 2 separate times, and just learning more about your overall experience in building your family. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks so much. I talk about both of our adoptions being complete opposite experiences. And so we adopted my daughter in 2016. And so that was a really big step for us. We contacted the agency a couple years prior, looked at the, adoption fees and some of that stuff and was just really overwhelmed with like everything. So we took a beat, we sort of like game planned, and then came back to the agency and said, okay, now we're ready, it's go time. This is like really the best fit. At that point, we like looked at various agencies and, we loved Adoptions from the Heart because you guys are so transparent about the fee schedule, about the process. It was like the good, bad, and ugly really sort of all delivered right to us, where some of the agencies were like, oh yeah, you'll be placed in a couple months and live happily ever after. And, when it sounds too good to be true, it usually is, right? And so, that sort of led us. But our first adoption was like the most beautiful experience. It sort of happened quickly, happened within the 8-month time frame, happened a lot sooner than we thought. The birth mom match was wonderful. We had a completely open adoption. So texting, phone calls, Instagram, we like kept in touch. We were there for the birth, in the room. Birth mom came to our hotel to do newborn pictures. Like it was just like such a beautiful experience. It always sort of like brings up a lot of like really, really great memories for me. And so, we spent some time thinking about a second adoption, and I think our daughter really was kind of the like sort of movement in that, because she was now at the age where she was talking about siblings and wanting a sibling. And so we started the second adoption process, and we went in knowing that our social worker said the second time you're gonna wait a little bit longer. So we were prepared for that. And yeah, so we were sort of going in, we like knew about disruptions and disappointments and such. So we experienced it all in the second adoption. And so we waited about 4 years for our son. And that was a really difficult waiting time. We had no idea that it was going to take 4 years. And so we were expecting maybe a max like 1.5 to 2 years. So, those were our expectations at that point. So, it really brought up a lot of questions. And during that time, we were matched. We were matched with, a birth mom who, changed her mind. I want to say probably like 2 months, after we were matched. She contacted the agency early in her pregnancy. And so, we felt like it was like a good fit and, all that stuff. So that was like really hard for us. We had a disruption that was like really, really difficult for us. I have always said like, a disruption would destroy me. And just like thinking about that, right? And that was a really, really difficult time. And at that point we were thinking like, do we just end the process? Like it was just like really, really tough. And so we chose not to. We, that was probably, oh goodness, probably like 3 years in at that point. And so our home study expired in April of of that year. And so we were talking about, all right, this is, enough's enough. Like we can't wait 6 years, right, for a baby. So we were prepared to tell our social worker, look, we're not going to do the home study update with additional funds. We had to do the home study over again. And so we were prepped for that. We got a call early March that our son was born. And so, while I think we were prepared for, the termination of just being a family of three and being happy and excited about that, our son sort of came along rather quick. It sort of surprised us in many ways because I think we were in that grieving process of like, okay, well, now we're going to be a family of three, and then boom, here he is, right? And so, he was he was born. We got the call. We went down to Delaware. Again, like, it's so interesting, but like, the birth mom fit was just amazing again, right? Just, how that kind of works out. I think that was one of our biggest anxieties of, the birth mom fit. This is like a relationship, and we're huge advocates for open adoption and like wanting to maintain a relationship and have that back and forth. So yeah, it was just an amazing fit. Certainly, like looking back, even today, he's 2.5. And so looking back, my sort of reaction is like, wow, that was like really tough. But if we stop the process, then we wouldn't have had him. So like, it's that idea, right? Of like, it'll happen when it happens. And like, sometimes you kind of have to go through the fire to, sort of get to the other side.
Wow. I mean, you certainly have been involved in every layer of what we try to talk about here at the agency. I really appreciate you kind of giving that general overview, and just there's so many layers and topics and themes that we can hit on. But I have to ask, my immediate gut question for you is, talk to me more about the hope that you continued to have, because you mentioned that if you had pulled out, you would not have your son. And I'm curious, like, what advice you would give to other families that really are in that same pocket, whether if they have another child or not, because that's a really hard point of the process and something that we want to continue to counsel and support our clients on. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, having been in it, waited almost 4 years, what advice you would give others to continue with that hope of it will happen when it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, that hope is like really hard, right? It's like easy to talk about it today, but I think if you were to have this interview in that moment, I think I probably would have talked about it very differently. And so I think what sort of held us on was this idea that we would have always wondered, what if, right? Like we obviously went and like started the process for a second child for particular reasons, right? And so we know that adoption has its has its ups and downs, and so I think if we did terminate, we would have always wondered, what if we held on for like another 6 months, right? Or what would have our lives been like being a family of 4? And so I think not having answers to those questions at the time really was the driving force of this is meant to be. It's just a matter of like being patient, staying focused, and just kind of like giving up the power and control that we all want in life, right? And just sort of letting it be and letting it happen the way it's supposed to happen.
Sure. Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, I feel like you should always follow your gut and your hearts of like what works for you and your family. And it sounds like for you guys, there was still this lingering piece of, okay, our paperwork is going to expire at this date. We feel better knowing that we gave it our all as opposed to pulling out now. And for you, that worked and ultimately led to the placement of your son. And I always say to folks when they're coming into our program, you are guaranteed a child in the end if you choose to stay with us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things, excuse me, that I really like about our program. But the journey to getting there is different for everybody. And things may come up in your life, whether it's personally or, if you do experience, say, a disruption that may shift the focus or shift the feelings and the desires of what works for you and your family. So I think that's important to note, that it will happen, it can happen, but you also have to follow your hearts of what works for you and your family.
100%, right? Trusting your gut. And so, our experience to like hold on and sort of hold out until we did, clearly a personal decision. And those folks who choose to terminate for whatever reason, right, is like totally their choice. And so, I think following your heart and gut, as you said, I think is a critical part of this process. But also knowing that you, as the adoptive parent, cannot control the journey. Yeah. That is like one of the most difficult pieces. I think sometimes we get really wrapped up in overanalyzing our key, in thinking about, all right, how are we going to maximize this? It's an effort to control the process. But in reality, one of the most difficult pieces that I had to really understand, and I come from a background of working in foster care and adoption on the provider side, right? And so now I'm the client, which makes it even more difficult, I think. But, that I truly had to know and believe I had no control in the process.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really strong statement, and something that I think folks may battle before, during, and even after placement, right? Is this idea of letting go of the control. And as you are, in our program, also recognizing that the agency cannot control your process or what's going to happen. And that's sometimes even harder, because here you are choosing a path, choosing an agency, and you expect certain things in return. But when you change your perspective to understanding that we're not here to necessarily give you a child, we are here to help you along the way in the supportive services for all members of the triad to get to that point of building your family.
Yeah, right. And, trust that we're all in it for the same outcome, yeah. Right? That it is for the best fit for the birth mom, for you as the adoptive parents, right? But I think that piece of control is really important. And it took me a really long time to like truly understand that.
Sure. I'm curious, because you do have the personal experience of adopting, but you also have the professional side as a therapist, and I'm sure you have seen a lot in your career. In terms of just mental health and things that should be addressed along the way, in retrospect, looking back at your experience with Adoptions from the Heart and the supportive services that are given to all members of the triad, talk to me about that conversation of just your awareness of what goes on and what is needed when people are thinking about building their family, more from like a mental health perspective.
Yeah. I think one of the pieces that is really difficult is, at least in my experience, I did not have a huge personal support network of people who had adopted and who were familiar with the process. So it became difficult to, like, as I'm venting, as I'm wanting support, to like really get the support that I needed, right? And so my social worker was there to answer some of those questions that I had, the sort of logistical stuff. But I think one piece that I needed was really that therapeutic support. I needed somebody, I needed a therapist who understood adoption and really helping when I am talking about the weight, when I'm talking about the lack of control, and talking about the grief of these, disappointments and disruptions, that I have somebody on the other side who understands. So I can't stress enough the importance of seeking out a therapist who understands, because this is an emotional process. And so it's like totally normal to go through a grieving process. And you may have gone through a grieving process to get here. But this is an emotional process that is going to bring up a multitude of things. And so having that support, I think, is key.
Sure. It's interesting you share that, because our agency is trying to now incorporate more of the therapeutic side of things to our program, and we are collaborating with therapists to give that adoption competent therapy that may be needed, whether it's an adoptive parent in process, placed, an adoptee who may be struggling, a birth parent who may need that extra support and whatnot. We're really trying to increase those services. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Talk to me about what your open adoption relationships look like today with your two children, similarities, differences, just some insight you can offer to others who may be coming back into our program to adopt again, to
Sure.
understand differences.
Yeah. So for my daughter, which was our first adoption, we still have a totally open adoption. We visit 1 to 2 times a year. It's been difficult with like COVID and stuff, but certainly getting back on schedule. She has a couple siblings, as well, that she maintains contact with. She's 8 now, so she has now started to like text back and forth with them, which I think is a new thing for her. But you know totally open in terms of like pictures, updates, funny stories, right? Just like those kind of cutesy things that you want to share, that clearly her mom appreciates, and just sort of the check-in. So we travel to PA 1 to 2 times a year to visit, and so that's sort of filled with lots of fun things. We sort of have a whole couple days planned of just fun things, of hanging out and having fun and all that good stuff. For my son, we have an open adoption with a visit a year. We meet with birth mom out of state, and so we sort of write back and forth via the 23 Snaps app. So a little bit different than like texting and Instagram from my daughter's mom, to using that app as a way to share pictures, stories. He went to the doctor a couple weeks ago, and the doctor was talking about asthma, and it was so it was so amazing to be able to write to birth mom and say, what's the deal? What's the family history, right? Like, should we be concerned, right? Like things that, are going to come up. And he's only 2, right? He's 2.5. So, there's going to be a lot more things that, happen, but, be able to, talk about his mom, and to be able to share pictures and, have that process, I think is like really cool.
Well, and it's nice to see that you do have different levels of openness with your two children. Neither one sounds like it's better than the other. It's just different. But your kids are healthy and happy. You're able to be a family in the way you want to be. And I think that's important to note, because an open adoption doesn't just look one way.
Right.
I see that oftentimes in our birth parent support group here at the agency, because the ladies have different relationships, and sometimes they do this like comparison thing of like, oh, well, what do you have over there? And it's also about their personalities and what's going on in their own lives that allow them or not allow them to have that connection or relationship. So I think that's important for folks who are listening in on this to recognize that it's okay if your connection looks different. It's also okay if you go through some ups and downs, and maybe there are times where you will connect more with your birth parents and times you won't for various reasons.
Absolutely. And so, that's something that I think is key, that, as, our daughter was smaller, we had a lot more contact, right? We would text maybe a couple times a week to, maybe like once a week. Now we sort of text maybe a couple times a month, right? So like knowing that that is going to shift and change, and that's like totally normal. And because we're talking about human relationships, right? Like that is the way it should be. And who knows, maybe we'll go back to texting a couple times a week in the future. But, kind of being, flexible and, really at the pace of like what feels good for you, what feels good for birth mom, and, going at that pace. Because again, we're talking about human relationships, and there is no sort of like putting that in a box and having it be super, super rigid.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. Any final thoughts that you'd like our community to know about your experience, something that you just want to get out there for folks to remember about adoption?
Yeah, I think the last final sort of message that I want to communicate is seek support, right? So, I think the agency is constantly looking for ways to support you, but think about ways that you need support outside of the agency, right? So that could be a therapist. Adoptions from the Heart has a closed Facebook group for waiting parents. Really use the supports to help guide you. Connect to those other families that are waiting, and could be a Facebook message. It could just be posting in the group like, man, this is hard. And just having a rally of your community being like, it sucks. But you're gonna get through it, right? There is an end point here. But don't be afraid to seek support, because it is an emotional process. And as much as you may think it is a logistical process, because there's a ton of paperwork, there's a ton of steps, it is not. It is an emotional process, and you need support.
Well said. Well, Michael, we really appreciate you sharing. I personally have really enjoyed just our conversation. You're so aware in many ways that folks are not. And I really appreciate you just kind of giving that insight and folks to be able to hear from somebody who's been through it, not once, but twice. And you did experience some challenges in terms of disappointments, disruptions, long wait time. And I think you hit on a lot of important themes that we may see in adoption. So we're just happy and appreciative that you shared on this platform. And we wish you and your family lots of love and best wishes in the future.
Thanks so much, Amanda. It was nice talking to you.
Take care. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and be sure to check out future episodes.